So my name is Anne de la Croix, and I don't know how presentation mode works at all, but I do know how to present about reflection, so I will just start doing that. My title is Make Reflection Meaningful Again. So I thought I'd make it nicely politically important, because I will discuss with you some dilemmas in education and research when it comes to reflection. This is my main topic, reflection, and actually it's starting to spread out a bit to other fuzzy concepts that have to do with the professional development of future doctors mainly. And I will take you through the landscape of reflection. I'm now very nervous to do anything with my PowerPoint. But I will start with just asking you quickly, if I talk about reflection, many courses in higher education have some sort of reflection module or reflection time or reflective essays. And I would like to ask you, why do we do all this reflection? What do you think reflection is good for? Can you think of something that immediately pops to mind, like reflection is good for developing something in students, but what? Well, my PhD student Sven Schaapkens, who is doing research into reflection with me, analyzed 47 reviews. So each review reviewed more papers about reflection. And we found no less than 233 suggested benefits of reflection. So we called it in Dutch, het duizend dingen doekje, reflectie, good for everything. Here's the list of what we found it could be good for, suggested to be good for. Well, you can read them here. I'm going through them very quickly. There's more. But reflection is also good for. And. But also. So there we go. That is a long, long list that the literature says reflection could be good for. Hopefully you saw your own suggestions in there as well. This is quite a situation where apparently a lot of people in their vision and their belief attach so much importance to one activity, concept of reflection. It's great because a lot of people agree that it is important and a key to learning. But there's also a problem, because if you look at the practice of reflecting with your students, what we found a few years back, and we described it in an article called The Reflective Zombie, is a big issue at the moment with reflection, especially in higher education. Our paper, The Reflective Zombie, describes this problem. It describes the problem of the student who has to reflect and who gets assessed for this reflection. So the teacher wants the student to reflect. The student asks, what is good reflection? The teacher says, it's when you do this, that, and that. And the student then does it without actually learning anything or taking the time to critically think about something. So a reflective zombie is somebody who displays all the outer signs of reflection, outer traits, without actually having learned to reflect it. So another article that I'd like to mention has as a title, they like it if you say you cried. So sometimes students are very aware of what they should show in their reflection, for example, emotions. And there's also a strong sense in other articles, for example, about empathy, a very big difference between what they experience on the inside and feel they have to show on the outside. And I think that's also the case sometimes for reflection. And this paper was published in 2018, and it caused a bit of a Twitter storm. And I wanted to share with you two tweets that I thought were very interesting. So the first one was from a medical student who said, I got poor marks for my reflective essays in year 1. So I adopted the robotic technique that they wanted with less reflection and poorer quality, but I did get great marks. So reflection in medicine is a tick box exercise. So what she is saying is, when I do reflection and really think about what I've learned and what I'm going through, I don't pass the marks for reflection. So I just do what they want and I adapt a certain technique. And then I pass a grade for reflection. And Julie DeWitt underneath says, oh, so true. Step 1, how did you feel? Step 2, step 3. So these kind of comments that we got and a lot of emails suggest that it's become a bit of a trick, causing you to be a bit of a zombie. You're doing something, but you don't have the heart on the inside. And especially the comment on the black screen really worried me, because this was someone who was reflective, but actually the educational system caused her to just show some tricks. And my immediate thought was, well, where is she doing the reflection now? Just with her friends at home? It's such a waste that something that was meaningful for her has been taken out of her official training. So where does this come from? Well, what often happens is that we need to define and measure if we want a topic to be relevant in higher education. So we need to study it and we need to teach it. And for both, we are always looking for a definition and a way to measure or assess this certain concepts. And what happens with something like reflection is that it is a very complex concept, but we narrow it down to something more concrete. So if you have to think of a way that you would define reflection, what would you do? I'm very curious what it would be. The definitions that I found are Cambridge Dictionary says serious and careful thought. Merriam-Webster says consideration of some subject matter, idea, or purpose. And the philosopher Heidegger says looking for the meaning of an event or the meaning of a history. So they're all still quite unprecise if you want to do a study into reflection. There we go. So the PhD student that I mentioned before, Sven Schapkens, you can see the article in the bar below, did a study where he did an umbrella review. So he reviewed 47 reviews, and he found that in general, the way we study reflection is can be divided in two schools or two approaches. One is quite technicist, so we want to know exactly what reflection is so we can measure it. And if different papers don't have the same concept of reflection or measure it differently, it is seen as a problem. We need to have one agreed definition and a model. Most of these papers also acknowledge that reflection is complex, but they think it can be solved if we just agree on a shared measure. Then the other approach is more dynamic. So they said, it's okay if we disagree about reflection, because reflection for me might be different from reflection to you. There is emphasis on the messy nature of practice. So what Malou was just talking about, there's a relationship between practice and theory when it comes to reflection. And the dynamic approach in researching reflection seems to be, it's okay if it's a bit open and no size fits all. And we need to study the practice of reflection. I think it's maybe already quite evident in the way I'm talking about it, that the problem with the technicist approach is that if we have one definition of reflection, it also means reflection is not a lot of things. So there's one way of looking at reflection, and what can occur is what we call the streetlight effect. So we are only looking at the things that we can measure, whereas reflection might happen at different places. I don't know if you all know the streetlight joke, that a drunk person in the night is standing by a streetlight, looking on the floor, and a police officer walks over and says, "What are you looking for, sir?" And he says, "I'm looking for my keys." And then the police officer says, "Oh, okay, you seem quite drunk. I'll help you look. Where did you lose your keys?" And then the drunk guy says, "Well, all the way over there." And then the police officer asks, "Well, why am I looking here then?" And then the drunk guy says, "Well, there's light here. It's easier." So that's kind of what sometimes seems to be happening with reflection research. We know the real reflection could be anywhere, but we're looking where the light is, where we know we have tools and validity and questionnaires and statistics, but that's not always where reflection is. So we have zombies, we have a streetlight effect, a way of doing research, but I believe there's more and more literature about how to make reflection meaningful again. The first one is to offer rich learning experiences. So make sure that when you ask students to reflect, that they've actually been through something to reflect on. In the words of a student in the bachelor phase of the medical school here, he said, "Sometimes the only thing I'm reflecting on is how good I am at reflecting." So he felt like he hadn't really had any experience to reflect on. The second one is have space for meaningful conversations with peers, with colleagues, future colleagues, with doctors. The third one is don't assess it. The moment you assess something, you have to have a gold standard of what passing means, and you make a checklist. The fourth one is using arts and humanities. I come from the humanities. I studied linguistics. It's quite normal in that field to say, what does this concept mean to you? And have a more ambiguous talk about concepts without immediately going to a definition and measurement tools. And the fifth one is research the practice of reflection. So not necessarily, this is reflection, are you doing it? But if I say to a group of students, let's reflect on practice, let's look what are they doing and how do they do it? And what does it mean to them? This was my talk about, I think without all the PowerPoint issues, I've tried to keep it as short as possible. And I can send more reading material to anyone who is interested. Thank you.